This is part 2 of the story, The Randy Reverend. Part 1 was called The Morgue Visit. This one is called Living in Sin. So, The Randy Reverend Part 2, Living in Sin. After her shattering morgue visit, Reverend Ann Baker returned home and fell into the arms of her boyfriend Chris, who held her until she fell asleep. Morning was well underway when she awoke. Chris was reading in bed with his glasses perched on the end of his nose. Anne turned to him as she gradually came to. I just can't tell you how much it meant to me that you were here when I got home last night. I don't know what I'd have done if I'd been here all by myself. Chris's expression combined love with concern. Thank goodness I was here, he said. I've been thinking while you were asleep. I just realised how lonely and difficult it is for you, all by yourself when things like this happen. I wish I didn't live so far away. After a few exchanges of mutual concern, it was inevitable they would make love. They did so gently and slowly. A long time afterwards, as they lay cuddled together, Anne felt the sorrow and unhappiness drain away from her, as she felt Chris beside her, seeming strong and solid. Her whole spirit seemed to lighten as she felt him warm against her. You know, this weekend-only relationship was getting to be not enough for me, even before this happened, continued Chris. And now I'm going to worry about you. What can we do about it? Well, I've been wondering whether I could get a transfer from the office in Toronto to somewhere closer. I could easily sell my place in Toronto. We could get something together. That's what you wanted, I mean. Meaning? Well, together, you know, a place of our own. Well, I hardly think the parish would approve of that. Some of the old biddies might be a bit put out at the thought of us living in sin. Well, we wouldn't have to live in sin, if you know what I mean. No, I don't know what you mean. She gave him a cunning look, eyelids half closed but still looking at him. Chris squirmed in her arms. Together, you and me. Look here, Chris, are you proposing to me? Well, I guess so, something like that. But if you're going to propose to me, you can do it properly, not lying there under the bedclothes. You can get out of bed and do it properly. Properly? Yes. Get right down there on your knees and ask your lady for her hand in marriage. Make me a respectable woman. It's cold out there. Too bad. Do you want to ask me or not? Oh, all right. Ann Baker, will you marry me? I love you and want to be with you full time. I'll need an answer quickly before I catch cold out here with no clothes on. Anne swung her legs round 90 degrees outside the bed and gripped Chris's head tightly between her thighs. Is this a good enough answer for you? And when Chris had been released and caught his breath, he said, I hope that was a yes. You are a wonderfully Randy Reverend. It's no wonder I love you so much. Now can I get back into bed? Being with Chris had brought Anne back into this world. It was Saturday. They shopped for groceries and had coffee at Tim Hortons. They read the papers. They went out to an Indian restaurant for dinner. Chris once again parked the car outside the Black Bull bar and stayed over. Chris, you really did mean what you said about us getting together. Of course I did. I've been thinking about it for quite a long time. It's you that I want to be with. We've both been there with the marriage thing once, done that, got the t-shirt. But I'm ready to go for it again if you are. And I know that it's you I want to be with. Will you come with me to church tomorrow morning? And I'll tell the parish that we're engaged. It would mean a lot to me. And when we're married, I hope that you'll be able to come sometimes, at least to the social functions. For you, my Randy Reverend, I'd be prepared to turn even into a holy roller. And so it was. Congratulations all around, everyone delighted. What a nice young man Chris was. When are you getting married? Well, we don't know just yet. Chris only asked me yesterday. Next Tuesday, Marilyn Sykes came into the office. Marilyn was a leading light in the ACW, that's the Anglican Church Women. She had a rather brusque voice, as though she was answering the phone in an office. Anne thought of her as the biddy of biddies. Marilyn was not a Jean sort of woman. In her late 70s, she was dressed in a knee-length skirt, top and cardigan, stockings and sensible shoes. And as always, her white hair was neatly coiffed, a hairdresser's dream. Without any preliminaries, she said, "Anne, I want to talk to you." "Yes, Marilyn, what about?" Marilyn cleared her throat. "About living in sin." "Here we go," thought Anne to herself. "I suppose she's had some old gossip report to her that Chris stayed over last weekend. She's going to read me some kind of riot act and threaten to report me to the bishop." So, stalling for time, she replied, "What about living in sin?" Rather uncharacteristically, despite what had seemed like the opening salvo in a frontal attack, Marilyn didn't answer at once. She moved from one foot to the other and looked away. Finally she said, "Anne, I need to talk to you in complete confidence. I know that you'll keep what I want to say to yourself." "Of course, Marilyn, anything you say to me stays with me. What's on your mind?" Perhaps she thought, this isn't going to be about me. What is she talking about? "Come and sit down." Marilyn perched on the edge of the two-seater at right angles to Anne's desk. Anne came round from behind her desk and sat on the chair opposite. Marilyn looked uncomfortable, both physically and emotionally. Still, she avoided Anne's eye. "I've never felt that I could tell anyone else before, not till you came to the parish." There was a long pause. Anne looked puzzled. "You see, Anne, Art and I were never married, and now it's coming up to our 50th, and the parish wants to put on a big party for us, and I don't know what to do. I don't know how I could possibly tell them the truth." These last words rushed out. Marilyn reddened and looked as if she might start to cry. She looked away again. Anne thought of Art, an unlikely Lothario, rather insignificant looking, medium height and build, thin grey hair with a bit of a sweep over. "Marilyn, back up a minute. Maybe you should tell me the whole story." "Well, it's like this. Arthur and I are cousins. We grew up together. We lived in the same neighbourhood in Pembroke. We went to school together and we were always best friends. Nothing more, I mean. Then Anne got married to Gloria, a girl he met at work. What nobody knew was that he was an abused husband. Gloria was bigger than him, well built. She used to hit him. She always made him feel very inadequate. Back in those days, no one had ever heard of abused husbands, so he couldn't say or do anything. I was the only one he could tell. I'd never said anything before, but I'd always had a bit of a crush on Art. He was always so kind and gentle. So we decided to run away. You could only get divorced for adultery in those days, so that wasn't an option. Gloria hadn't done anything like that as far as we knew, and we weren't going to do it and create a scandal. So one weekend, we just packed our bags and got on the train to Toronto. We had no money and we had to live in a miserable little basement apartment, but at least we were together. I got a job as a bookkeeper and Art got a job with C&R. It really was tough at first. We started living together as a couple. Yes, I know it was wrong, but we were young and in love. The family back in Pembroke didn't want anything to do with us. We had the 3 children, as you know, Jim, Susan and Heather. We never told them that we weren't actually married. After Art retired, we came down here to be closer to Jim and the grandkids. We could never get married because Art was still married, at least officially. We've always made our anniversary the day we left Pembroke. So that's what we've always said when people asked us about our anniversary. And now it's coming up to 50 years, and they want to throw us this party and we can't tell anyone. Marilyn broke into sobs. Anne reached for her box of tissues, let Marion compose herself, and then Marilyn continued. "So now what are we going to do? We lived in sin all these years. How can we make it right with God after all this time? And Art's health isn't good. You know how he has a heart condition. We're both nearly 80. What if he dies and we're still living in sin?" After this long speech, Anne held up her hands, palms up. "Whoa, hold on a minute, Marilyn. I'm hearing that you have 3 worries. You're worried about the party and that the parish is planning for you. You're worried because you and Art aren't married, and you're worried that God will punish you for living in sin. That's a pretty big burden you've been carrying." "I guess," sniffed Marilyn, "but what can I do?" Well, let's start by seeing how we can make things right with God. Will you let me pray with you? Marilyn nodded, and Anne asked God to look graciously on Art and Marilyn, whose lives were so full of worry. As she put it, a long time ago, Art was in trouble. They didn't know what to do. They did the best they could. Now they've been living together as husband and wife, loving each other faithfully for almost 50 years. She asked God to let them both know that they're loved by him, just as they loved Jim, Susan and Heather and the grandchildren. She asked for God's grace and mercy on them, as it has been all through those years when they've done their best for each other and for their children. She ended with these words: Marilyn, may God forgive you any sin that you've committed and be with you in Art always. Amen. Marilyn brightened at this. Thank you, Anne. I knew that you'd understand. I hope that God does too. But is there anything we can do? She took another tissue. You mean about not being married? Is that what you mean? Well, I think we'd both be too embarrassed to stand up and say we've not been married after all these years. And anyway, we can't get married even if we want to. Art's still married as far as we know. Gloria went out west. We don't even know if she's still alive. And even if she's dead, we don't know where or what name she might have been using. So we couldn't get a death certificate. Anne did some quick thinking. I think I may have a solution, she said. What about having a ceremony like a renewal of marriage vows? You could say the vows to each other before God, even though you don't have a marriage license. So even if it wouldn't be legally a wedding, it would be as far as God and everyone there was concerned. You could still have the party and invite your children and your friends. I wouldn't be telling the bishop, she thought. At this, Marilyn's expression became considerably more cheerful. Yes, she said, the parish could still have the party for us. Oh, Anne, I can't tell you how much better I feel. You've taken such a weight off my mind, and Art will be so happy as well. I knew you'd understand. Well, God surely moves in mysterious ways, thought Anne. Here I was thinking I was about to get chewed out, thinking that Marilyn was a rigid and narrow-minded old biddy. Perhaps I've learned something today. Marilyn got up and walked towards the door. This time she looked at Anne quite directly. "Anne, it was so nice to meet your young man on Sunday. Everyone really liked him. When are you planning the wedding?" "We haven't set a date yet, and it won't be too long, I hope. Chris is trying to move his job out of Toronto so that he can work in this area if he can." She got up as a way of ushering Marilyn to the door. Marilyn turned and gave Anne a knowing, almost crafty smile. "You know, really, you could let him park in your driveway." Anne blushed a deep scarlet, and Marilyn went on. "My friend Elizabeth lives 3 doors down from you. We both think it's really thoughtful and sweet of him to park at the pub and walk to your place. He's so discreet. But now winter's coming on, we think that it's too cold for him to keep doing that. Just a thought from someone who's lived in sin for 50 years. Anne, recovering her equilibrium, laughed, and although somewhat self-consciously. Marilyn joined in and Anne gave her a hug. "Thank you," she said. At the ceremony, "Art, will you continue to give yourself to Marilyn to be her husband, to love her, comfort her, honour and protect her, and, forsaking all others, be faithful to her as long as you both shall live?" "I will." "And Marilyn, will you continue to give yourself to Art to be his wife?" And so on and so forth. Tearfully, "Yes, I will." Her mascara began to run, and a little posy of roses in her hand shook visibly. "I, Arthur, take you, Marilyn, to be my wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish for the rest of our lives according to God's holy law. This is my solemn vow." Then Marilyn said the corresponding things to Art. And Anne continued, "Art and Marilyn have made solemn vows to each other in the presence of all of you as witnesses. They promise to continue living faithfully together as husband and wife. May God continue to bless their union in the future, just as he has blessed it for the last 50 years. Amen."